The Great Circus Parade is always a wonderful spectacle with beautiful antique wagons, horses, elephants, and performers galore. Here to talk about the history of this marvelous recreation are Bill Fox and Jack McKeithen. They're my special guests next on I Remember. Hi, I'm Jim Peck. Welcome to I Remember. Joining me tonight are Bill Fox and Jack McKeithen, the co-chairs of the 2009 Great Circus Parade. As this pageantry once again paraded the streets of Milwaukee, it really returned to the city where it all began. Let's take a look.
The Great Circus Parade takes us back to a time when circus performers paraded through the streets announcing their arrival. In the 1800s and early 20th century, a parade was an inviting advertisement that the circus was in town. The spectacle was a great way to lure townspeople to the big top. The antique wagons are part of the vast collection at Circus World Museum in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The world-famous Ringling Brothers Circus was founded in Baraboo, and the idea for a museum came from John M. Kelly, the Ringlings' longtime personal attorney. It opened in 1959. And the next year, Charles P. Fox, better known as Chappie, took charge of the museum. Under his inspired leadership, a small collection of circus wagons would grow to more than 200 today. Circus World Museum also has over 9,500 posters, rare photographs, and other circus artifacts in its historic collection. Chappie Fox wanted to recreate the old circus parades and shared his vision with Ben Barkin, an expert in public relations. With Ben's help, in 1963, circus wagons took to the streets of Milwaukee. The Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company sponsored the circus parade for a number of years. Transporting the antique wagons from Baraboo became a spectacular event in itself. Many years they were brought in by train, with riders eager to wave to crowds gathered at stops along the way. The parade showgrounds, set up at the lakefront with wagons on display, offered a chance to see a circus performance or even ride an elephant. The wardrobe department pays great attention to detail in preparation for the parade. It's a big job adorning not only the human performers, but animals as well. In 1981 and 1982, the parade was held in Chicago, and Baraboo has been the site of smaller parades. After a 12-year absence, in 1985, the Great Circus Parade returned to Milwaukee. With the help of Bill Fox and Jack McKeithen, it would be an annual event here for the next 19 years. 2009 marked the 30th time the Great Circus Parade graced the streets of Milwaukee.
Why is Wisconsin referred to as the mother of circuses?
Well, the answer to that is that in 1847, the Mabee family came from the east and formed a circus in the Delavan area of Wisconsin, and was followed over a period of time by over 100 circuses that formed in the state of Wisconsin, mostly in the southern part of the state, and then, of course, the Ringling family in 1887 in the Baraboo district.
Why Wisconsin?
Well, one of the reasons why was it was a growing population growth, and there was much more people were migrating west. The other was that it was a magnificent place to feed the horses, the pastures, all of the things necessary to maintain the animals for the circus, which was an integral part of all the circuses that traveled in the country in those years.
What happened to all those little circuses?
They played themselves out.
I mean, they couldn't have had big budgets for a lot of animals, a lot of wagons.
No, but they did pretty well. Don't forget, they didn't have income taxes in those days.
I see.
And
for some people, we don't have them now, but that's a whole other show.
But many of these shows, when they first formed in the mid-1800s, were small shows. And they didn't have much of a budget, and it didn't take very much to wipe them out. The weather, the drought, the mud, it really was the devastation for a lot of these circuses that just didn't make it for a very long period of time, and with no particular capital structure behind them.
Why did they use parades? First of all, when did that start, and why was it a good idea?
Again, that's a question better answered by Bill, but I would tell you what I've learned in years of working on the parade with Chappie Fox and Ben Barkin and then all at the same time with Bill that was their way of advertising that there's something fun, follow us back, and then they got the money. And that was what it was all about. They had to make money, and as you talked earlier about, what happened to so many of the circuses. Well, they failed financially because if they couldn't get to the next town and get their money, they didn't have the ability financially to keep going. So those things became paramount, that they get the people who were in the area, in town, to come and see the big top shows and all the games and beautiful things and the fun rides for them.
Is there any way of knowing who started the tradition of circus parades? Do we have any records going back that far?
Well, I think, Jack, really that the records do go back to the early 1800s. And a lot of the reasons why these parades were staged by the circuses was to lead the townfolk to the circus grounds. None of the circuses were staged inside an urban area, no matter how large or small the town was, and so they had to know where to go. And they would follow the circus parade, as little or as large as it may have been, to the circus performances that usually occurred twice a day.
Somebody told me that and I don't have the answer to this, so I hope you do, that they used to put something in the noses of the horses. What was it and why?
Well, the answer to that, Jack, you have, or do I have?
You have it.
All right. It was, you may have heard about it more recently with respect to the circus parades that were staged in Milwaukee and probably other areas. And that is that the horses were the horses by far outnumbered any other animals in a parade. And when they came in contact with animals foreign to them, like tigers and cats, elephants, camels, in order to cut the smell, they rubbed the mentholatum really into the nostrils of the animals. And we actually had that happen in this year's parade, where a lot of the horses, which were close to the elephants near the end of the parade, were anointed in that way.
Really? Fascinating. The Great Circus Parade, let's talk about our gem here. Yeah. Who was Chappie Fox, and where did this idea come from?
Well, he was Bill Fox's uncle, number one.
Okay, that's his first claim to fame.
Yeah, and that was a great claim to fame, and that's part of the reason Bill has the interest, probably a major driving reason he has such an interest as he does in circus and circus parades in particular, because Chappie had visions that very few people I've ever had the pleasure of knowing could put together and then go and get other people. Sometimes it was a challenge, but he could get other people eventually to come along and help him achieve his goal. And so he spotted and knew where a lot of these former circus wagons were, which were rotting and decaying in different parts of the world. And he set out to find people to help him rebuild them once he got them located, and all he needed then was money to get it going.
Which sounds so easy, but where did the idea come from? Here's a guy who obviously loved circuses and pageantry. First of all, how did he know where those wagons were?
Well, he was in 1952. He was working at the Prime Manufacturing Company. And but his hobby and avocation was animals, really, primarily horses. But he then followed the circus everywhere he could and every time he could as much of a youngster when he was 7, 8 years old. And when he wrote a book called Circus Parades in 1953, he did a tremendous amount of research and moved out across the country trying to find out, really across the world in a sense, interconnecting with circus fans of America, circus fans everywhere he could find, asking if they knew of the whereabouts of wagons that he might go and photograph and include in his book. And through that research, and he kept copious notes, his files are just enormous over the years. When it came time when the real nut got cutting, which was in 1960, he knew where these were, in good or bad shape, most of them in pretty bad shape.
Which begs the question, how do you fix up something that nobody is making anymore? I mean, nobody's making wagon wheels. Nobody's making all the things that would go wrong with a big wagon. There
are still a few people in the U.S.
really
who have the ability and the interest in doing that kind of work, and they are the ones we used in the preparation for this last parade. Were Amish down in the southern end of Indiana, so we trucked the wagon wheels that needed work down there, and they rebuilt them in many cases in their entirety. and then they were brought back, and others were transported down. And we had over 200 wheels that had to be reworked this time. And then, of course, you got to bring them back to Baraboo, where the artists are to paint and make them match the colors that are on those beautiful wagons. And that's how it's done.
How did Chappie travel around and get people to give him or sell him wagons? I assume you got a lot of people to give him wagons.
Well, that's very true. I've always referred to him as the great burglar. He would first of all burglarize your heart, and then he'd burglarize your pocketbook. Not all of it usually. He'd leave a little bit in there for the next burglary. But he was very proud of the fact that the collection of the wagon collection, which numbered over 100 circus historical wagons, came without paying one dime. They were the dint of his personality and his love and passion for the circus and the Circus World Museum that he was about to embark on. Just caused people to respond to him in a way that was quite unique.
It is fascinating. Anybody who ever met Chappie knows exactly what you're talking about. I had that great pleasure because he could talk birds out of trees. He could sell snow to Eskimos. I mean, whatever you want, analogy you want to pull up, he certainly had it. Okay, he got the idea for bringing back. It's not re-bringing back, but bringing back and having a circus parade in Milwaukee. Kind of an outlandish idea. How do you get the money for that?
Well, let me just correct you on one thing, if I could, and that is that his idea was he had collected. The museum started in 1960, and by 1962 he had collected about 28 circus wagons that were in a paradable state. And he decided at that time that it would be a wonderful thing for the Circus World Museum's attendants to hold a great parade in the streets of Baraboo.
Okay.
And he began looking for sponsors. And then Jack picked up from there.
My recollection is he went to 12 different companies and or wealthy individuals and was unsuccessful.
In Baraboo?
All over.
All over.
All over.
But that's where he was going to do it.
Yeah, but that's where the wagons were, and that's where the Circus World Museum is, so he had to be there. But what he did, after his 12 visits and turned down, he heard about this man named Ben Barkin in the Milwaukee area, and he had access, because of his public relations firm, to Schlitz Brewing Company. So maybe that's a good place to go. So he got in touch with Ben, and Ben put him through lots of questions and why, and as Bill referenced a little earlier, Chappie got into Ben's head and his heart. So he committed that he would arrange a meeting with Bob Eline Jr., who was president and CEO, as well as chairman of the board, as a matter of fact, of Schlitz Brewing. And they went over and had a meeting with Bob, and during the process of all of this, if you knew Bob Eline at all or know his history, you know how he loved horses. Well, pretty quickly, he attached himself personally in admiration of Chappie and his knowledge of horses and his interest in doing this. So he asked Chappie some questions. Can you really pull this off and do it right, putting it down the streets of Milwaukee? And he said, well, I want to do it in Baraboo. And Ben said, you can't do it in Baraboo. You don't have enough bathrooms for the people who are going to come. You got to be in a big city like Milwaukee. Well, after about 45 minutes, as I think Bill and I recall jointly, and he's just nodding yes, Bob said, okay, we'll give it a go. So 1963, Schlitz, sole sponsor, brought it back, and it was produced then, I think, every year on July 4th.
Right.
And then celebrate on the July 4th weekend. So it gave people the opportunity to come, and Schlitz closed off Galena Street, which was there in front of their headquarters. And they had beautiful buntings and American flags and the blue and white flags that Circus wants to fly, all kinds of things. And if you were around at all, you had an opportunity to see it. And again, it was all free for the public.
It was phenomenal. Wouldn't you love to have been a fly on the wall as Chappie Fox worked Ben Barkin and Ben worked Chappie? I mean, those two master promoters, one trying to get the money for the parade, the other trying to make sure the parade ends up in Milwaukee. Poor Bob Eline never had a chance.
He did not have a chance.
You're right on that one.
And as you correctly described it, Jim, Chappie had a terrific ability to get next to Ben, Well, he not only had the ability to get next to Ben, as I referenced, he got next to Bob, but Ben then would fill in any gaps that were needed, and Bob, he just basically followed what Ben said was necessary for the company to do the things it wanted to do, and part of the community spirit that they wanted to have in the marketing of their products.
How long was Schlitz the primary or the sole sponsor?
Schlitz sponsored from 63 to 73. And during that time, they sponsored 10 parades. If you count the years, with the first one being in 63 and the last one in 73, you'd say, well, there are 11 years.
There's an extra one there,
But there was one year where there was civil disturbance going on in the major cities, and the company was concerned that something bad could happen and the horses panic and other problems. So they took a pass that year, but then resumed it the following year. And I think that was 68.
You got it, Jack. Right on the button.
So then Schlitz fell into some hard times, and I assume that's when their sponsorship ended.
No, they actually stopped long before
the
decline in sales started. It was 73, and they were still soaring meteorically. And if you remember, there was the Arab embargo in 73, in October of 73, and there was a real concern throughout the nation of whether there'd be enough oil to run trains and planes and rails and so forth. So what if you spend all the money to get ready for the next parade? So Schlitz said, we're going to take a pause for a while and see how this works out. And they never resumed sponsorship of it.
Do I remember correctly that at some point, because I was gone, Chicago stole our parade?
Bill can answer that. I wouldn't use the word stole. But they did have the parade down there 2 years.
Yeah,
well, I consider that
in the late 70s. I think one of the reasons why Schlitz may also have waned a little bit in the support of the parade, in addition to what Jack has correctly said, is that Chappie left the Circus World Museum in October of 1972 and went down to be director of research at the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey organization in Florida. And the relationship that Jack and I have, but which Ben and Chappie had together, because of that distance factor, sort of broke. And there may have been less enthusiasm for putting it together, because the charismatic nature of the two of them working together was really marvelous.
So the parade stopped in 73.
Right.
Then there were a couple of years when it was in Chicago.
Right.
How long before it got resurrected, and how did that come about?
It was brought back in 1985, and Ben Barkin was the thrust out in the front, but there was a triangle, and he and I made up the other corners of that triangle.
Okay.
And Ben was honored in 1984 by the Milwaukee Press Club, and he was the man of the year, and you know how that works.
Yep.
And Ben said to me and many others in the community, all of my family members who don't live here are coming in for this night. I want you to be there. So I was there, and I had lots of fun teasing him in the following months, because I told him, I said, when you were making your speech, you started off thinking you were Martin Luther King, because you said, I have a dream. And then you describe the dream, and then I have another dream, and you describe it. And one of those dreams was the return of the Great Circus Parade. Well, there must have been 4 to maybe as many as 600 people in that big room in honoring Ben and celebration. And some of them chanted out, bring it back, Ben, you can do it. Well, when he was off the podium and visiting around now down in the audience after it was over, he was just rushed by people. The next morning, about 9 o'clock, he called me at my office and said, you won't believe how my phone's been ringing this morning. I can't get dressed, and they want me to bring that parade back. I'm willing to give it a go, but you and Bill Fox have to help me, because you got to raise the money.
Well, good.
So we said yes.
Of course.
And
why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Just a snap.
Yeah.
But what kind of response did you get when you hit the streets and started asking people for money?
Well, in the first year of 1985, I think the parade required around $650,000, which is almost a shadow of what it required by the end of the 1990s.
Right.
And it was easier then. It's always easier when you're starting something new and fresh. The problems come when you try to repeat it year after year, the way Jack and I did for so many years, along with Ben and Chappie.
So it gets progressively more difficult to raise the money.
Sure.
You must have had all along, however, great support from City Hall.
Well, as you know,
that has a piece of history to it.
The great Mayor Meyer at that time was supporting the City of Festivals parade, and he had quite a little to do about that.
He didn't want the circus parade.
November of 1984, the Common Council passed a resolution, 16-0, offering to issue a permit to the Great Circus Parade.
That's right.
And the mayor was going to veto that.
Ooh.
He did not want competition with his City of Festivals parade, and he was adamant against that. He knew Ben Barker and I were great friends, and Henry Meyer and I knew each other pretty well, especially with his and my equal love for John Ernst Cafe. So on one of those occasions, he asked me if I would help him bury this Great Circus Parade idea. It just didn't fit, blah, blah, blah. And I said, Henry, I'm helping put it on.
One of the very few political gaffes he made. But the...
Well, he made another political gaffe. He actually rode in the parade in 1985, and unfortunately, the poor fellow got booed for about 3.5 straight miles by 400,000 people.
Oh, that must have gone over well. He did have a thin skin.
He did.
This year's parade was phenomenal, at least in my recollection. The 2009 parade, was it as good as I'm thinking?
Well, I would say it was one of the best parades we ever did, and that was the 20th year. After we had the 85 and then 2003, we found out, and thankfully to some of our key sponsors, they gave us an alert in 2002. We'll be there next year with support, but after that, we don't want to support to the same extent. And we took an assessment of our possibilities of being able to raise the money the following year. And we found that if not impossible, next to. So, but we were committed, he and I. By this time, Ben was very feeble in 2002.
Right.
We didn't have him, and he died. And we didn't have him at all after that, of course, for the three. And we put on the 2003 parade, and we kept working, and we had built a rainy day fund, which helped us, but it took 6 years to get enough courage plus money to go to Baraboo and say, we want to bring this parade back. And we started that in maybe 2006, and then in 2007, we were still working to raise money, and then we started having this conversation. And they, in the meantime, at Circus World Museum, had let some personnel go as attendance declined, and they didn't have revenue from the parade, which had helped sustain them. That was the primary funding, really, that kept that facility alive, and maintenance of the products and the wagon and so forth. So we said, we don't want to do it in 2008. You can't do it in 2008, so we'll do it in 2009. And then we worked to get to an agreement, and what would it cost? And then we had a goal that we knew we had to reach in order to pay them. And we signed a contract in March of 2008.
I was surprised in researching the show that you don't get money from the State Historical Society. This is all pretty much on your own, isn't it?
It is.
Yes, it is. Yeah, they give no money to Circus World Museum for operations. So capital needs, if they can make their case, and it's competitive with the other 8 historical facilities that they are responsible for and helping operate those. They then will provide some capital dollars, but that doesn't put parades down the street and do the maintenance of the wagons and that wonderful collection of posters and circus memorabilia that's over there.
It is a treasure. By the way, what happened to the 40-horse hitch this year? I was really looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's a shame.
It's interesting you'd bring that up, because everybody loved that, because it was such a magnificent, huge piece of artwork, and the skills of the drivers with those beautiful 40 horses. And that primarily was arranged by the Sparrow family out of Zeering, Iowa. And Bob Eline, with his love for horses, he was one of the greatest enthusiasts in the Schlitz sponsorship days of getting the 40 back. And he asked Chappie Fox, he said, I understand some of the historical photographs showed the 40 turning in a street, and it tore down this saloon with the wagons running up on the sidewalk. So can you put it down the street of Milwaukee without tearing buildings up in the wagons? Chappie said, I can do it. And so he said, we're going to sponsor, and they built the harnesses So each and every horse looked exactly the same. You know, let's say it was like our suits. Each one of us is suited the same way.
Well, I've had the pleasure of sitting on that when Dick Sparrow drove it. And to sit on that wagon and look out over the rumps of 40 huge horses is one of the most impressive things that I've ever done.
I agree with you.
It's a real effort, though. You know, the Sparrow family didn't own, they had 40 Percheron horses that they tried to mix and match in order to put this team together, and they did it every year. They just didn't have time, or for health reasons, weren't able to do it for the 2009 parade.
So it wasn't as though they had 40 horses all trained and ready to go at any given
They
moment.
had disbanded their team for the 40 horse hitch.
Do you guys have favorite wagons that are in the parade?
I would answer yes, all of them.
Okay.
From my point of view.
Can you narrow that down just a little bit?
Well, I think that the glorious wagons are the ones that have eventually been gold-leafed. And those are some of the fairy tale wagons with Cinderella and Mother Goose. Hopefully the old lady in the shoe will be gold-leafed one day. And the Lion and Mirror tableau, which was absolutely magnificent. It was the background cover story for a town and country story that occurred in the late 1989.
We've got about 30 seconds, so let me just quickly jump in and say, as we tape this, it's 2009. Are we going to ever have another circus parade?
Well, we hope so. We know it can't be next year. And there are some efforts and interest on the parts of other people here in the city of Milwaukee, and they're telling us lots of ideas, and we said, take your ideas and execute some of them, and we'll applaud you and help you as we can, but you take the lead and help make
Jim,
this
we're
happen.
here to mentor them.
Yes.
If there are others younger, enthusiastic, we're here to help.
It's just great, and anybody who's seen the parade knows how fabulous it is. Bill Fox, Jack McKeithen, thanks very much for being with us. Thank you, as always. It's so nice to see you. Hope you'll join us next time as we continue to remember. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Pleasure to be with you.